To be a truly great pro wrestler means to be great in all the different aspects of the industry. Sure, Ricochet may be a phenomenal in-ring talent, but if we're being honest, he's not the best promo. And while a guy like Psycho Sid had a great intensity and physique, he was never the best in-ring performer once the bell rung. But who are the best all-round performers that have mastered every aspect of the industry? Well, that's exactly what we're going to be looking at today. And where better to start than with Shawn Michaels. Yes, everyone knows that Shawn Michaels is one of the best in-ring workers to ever do it. Someone whose moveset was considered so spectacular for its day, it influenced 1,000 wrestlers who came after. Honestly, if it wasn't for him, then we might not have people like Seth Rollins or AJ Styles today. Sure, he might not have originated a lot of the things he did. No, much of that can be traced back to people like the Dynamite Kid. But you could argue that it was HBK who perfected it. Need any evidence of his greatness in the ring? Then you only have to look at the countless 5-star classics he had against opponents like The Undertaker, Razor Ramon, Triple H, Chris Jericho, Bret Hart, Kurt Angle, Ric Flair, and just about anyone else he's ever stepped into the ring with over the years. And that wasn't the only thing he perfected during his career either, because he was also an excellent promo too. That's right, whenever Shawn got on the mic during either his first or second run, he could always be counted on to deliver, whether that be in helping build the story of his current feud, or just taking a little jab at one of his rivals. And even when he didn't have a mic in his hand, he was still able to sell his star presence just by the way he carried himself. Really, it's no surprise then that so many people have taken so much from him. And it's also no surprise he continues to be such an excellent mentor down in NXT for the modern day group of talent he's helping to develop there, as we struggle to think of a single aspect of what he does that the Heartbreak Kid isn't excellent at. In-ring? Check. Promos? Check. Character work? Check. Star presence? Check. He truly has it all. But is he better than our next subject? Someone who has been a very close friend of his for decades now? Well, that's something you can all decide amongst yourselves. For us, now that we've presented our case for Shawn Michaels, we'll simply present our case for why Triple H deserves to be in this video too. Of course, it should be obvious that Triple H would find himself in a video about the greatest all-rounders to ever do it, because while he might have never been the absolute best at any one particular thing, being number 2 or 3 in so many different areas makes up for that. And to be honest, that last statement isn't entirely true, because you could make an argument that in 2000, he was the best in-ring wrestler in the world. Then there are all the other aspects of his craft outside of the actual wrestling that he's mastered too. After all, being a great technician can be very important if you want to call yourself an all-time great, but it's not the be-all and end-all, something the game has been all too aware of throughout his career. That's why he also made sure to become a master of the mic too. Yes, Triple H has always had the ability to talk the talk, with some of his best mic work coming during the build to his iconic series of WrestleMania matches with The Undertaker, as well as his time feuding with CM Punk. And with his current role seeing him be a representative of the company itself as its chief content officer, the game has also proved himself to be great behind the scenes too. From managing talent to booking the show. Yes, it's these very skills which has seen him ascend to the level of the most powerful man in the entire industry in many ways. And that's something that everyone else we're going to be looking at today, no matter how great they are, simply cannot say about themselves. No, the game is unique in this respect. And with him now being retired from the ring and entirely focused on the business side of things, there's no telling how long he'll remain in such a spot. Maybe he'll even be there long enough to see our next subject return to the Fed, another great all-rounder in Chris Jericho. Really, what else is there to say about Chris Jericho which hasn't already been said? After all, if you're looking for someone who can put an excellent match together, seemingly with ease, then he's your guy. And if you're looking for someone who can deliver a killer promo in his sleep, then he's also the one you should be after. But it's more than just that with the learning tree. Yes, not content with just being a great in-ring worker in promo, Jericho has also proven himself to be a master of reinvention over the years, something which has ensured his character never gets stale. In fact, so much has he done that many of his old characters could be brought back again today, and they'd still feel fresh because fans never got a chance to tire of them. And even on those rare few occasions when audiences have started to tire of the Winnipeg native, he's known exactly what to do to get over again, as can be seen in his current excellent learning tree gimmick, where he's playing the role of a man who delusionally thinks he's beloved even in the face of overwhelming boos. Honestly, it's hard to think of a situation where Jericho wouldn't be able to make himself feel like a star all over again. And it's hard to think of a company he couldn't do this in either, because in the last decade alone, he's done it in WWE, AEW, and Japan. Yes, it's an underrated element of his greatness that Y2J knows how to adapt in order to make himself a success in a variety of different places, with him being all too aware of what each individual fan base wants and being able to turn this up depending on the circumstances. That's why when he's in America, you can expect to see a lot of sports entertainment, and when he's in Japan, you can expect to see a more in-ring focused side of him. And this ability to adapt and oscillate can also be found in our next subject too, another member of the current day AEW roster, the one, the only, Bryan Danielson. Yes, Danielson will without a doubt go down as one of the greatest wrestlers of all time. Seriously, if we're talking about in-ring work, then there are very few who've ever been able to approach his level. Even as he enters semi-retirement, in fact, in the last year or so alone, we've seen him have wall-to-wall classics against the likes of Zack Sabre Jr., MJF, and Will Ospreay. But it's not just the in-ring wrestling which makes the American Dragon so great. No, he's also one of the better promos out there, something his run as the Planet's champion on 2019 SmackDown showed. And then there's his seemingly magnetic ability to draw fans towards him and get them behind him en masse, to the point that these fans hijacked WrestleMania one year in support of their favorite. Who else has a connection like this with audiences all over the world? Mick Foley? Eddie Guerrero? That might be about it. And then there's the other aspect of Bryan Danielson that truly solidifies his spot as an all-time legend, one which sometimes goes forgotten, and that's his sheer longevity and versatility. Yes, like with Chris Jericho, the Aberdeen native has also been doing this for a long time now, since the early 2000s in fact. And aside from a few years during the mid to late 2000s when he was forced to enter temporary retirement, there's been no pause worthy of note in his work. And that means he's been able to give us three very distinct and different eras then, each of which has been just as fun to watch. First, of course, there was the Ring of Honor era, the time when Danielson first established himself as a master of the ring. And then after that, there was his WWE era, the period he went by the name of Daniel Bryan and perfected the character work side of things. Then, once these were done, there was his current AEW era, a part of his life where, now with each aspect being carried out to perfection, we've been able to get the best of both worlds when it comes to the American Dragon. Someone who can still go in the ring to a higher level than anyone else, all while having a star aura which is present in everything he does. Will this latter run eventually see him get a singles bout with our next subject in their current incarnation? That remains to be seen, but if they do, it'll no doubt only further solidify the case for Adam Copeland being one of the best all-rounders out there too. That's right, while he might never have been the #1 in-ring wrestler in any company he was with, and while he might never have been the absolute best of the best on the mic, Adam Copeland was able to do everything to such a high level that he managed to find himself in that upper echelon. And this has been evident all throughout his career, from his early days as a tag team act in the 90s, right through to his singles run in the 2000s, and then into his return from retirement in the 2020s. How is he still able to go at such a high level this far into his career, especially with all the injuries he's accrued? Well, that's because the man formerly known as Edge knows exactly how to maximize everything he does. In fact, his ability to lay out a match masterfully has always been something his peers have praised him for, and it's one of the reasons so many of his bouts are considered classics today. Then, of course, there's his versatility. That's right, how many people can say they were so good at tag team wrestling that they helped to reinvent the division? And of those, how many can say that they were then so good at singles wrestling that they were able to get absolutely nuclear heat as a heel champion every time they picked up a microphone, enough to where they could go on to main event WrestleMania on multiple occasions? And how many of those could then say that they've gone on to fill the role of grizzled veteran, helping to raise the younger generation up in not just one, but two companies? We struggle to think of another name, so for that reason alone, Edge has to be considered an absolute legend. But then the same thing could in many ways be said about our next subject, a one-time tag team partner of Adam Copeland's, Randy Orton. Now, we know he might never have reinvented tag team wrestling as such, but during his decades-long career, the Viper has done just about everything else. And the way he's been able to do this is by excelling at just about every area of his craft. Yes, we've talked before about how smooth Randy is in the ring, and how much his peers love to lock it up with him because he's one of the safest pairs of hands out there. But we really haven't talked much about his mic work. And that's because it's not as flashy as others, such as Chris Jericho. But that doesn't mean it's not effective. And the same could be said for his overall understanding of the gimmick too, at any given time, as he knows exactly what to do in order to maximize this with all of the little things he carries out. Things like the way he walks, or the manner in which he moves around between the moves. Hell, it's these smaller, less obviously visible aspects of what he does that have helped him to get so over with the bosses that even when he was at his worst to deal with backstage during the 2000s, Randy always held a prominent spot on the card. because just like with 90s Shawn Michaels, he was that great. And it's also the reason WWE have seen fit to make him a world champion on 14 separate occasions over the years, with many of these runs seeing him be the top dog on whatever brand he was on at that point in time. Yes, the reality is that when you break it down, it is near impossible to find something about wrestling that the Knoxville native hasn't mastered, with him being just as effective as both a babyface or a heel, depending on what the situation calls for. And considering he's now 44 and seemingly still as strong as ever, who knows how much higher he'll be able to raise his game before all is said and done. Maybe he'll even be considered the GOAT when it comes to all-rounders once his career is over. But then maybe that title will go to our next subject instead, someone who's also a member of the current day WWE roster. Who are we talking about here? Why, Seth Rollins, of course. Now, we shouldn't have to tell you why Seth Rollins is a great wrestler, as he's been proving this to us all since his days in Ring of Honor, where he worked under the name of Tyler Black. And with his skills in that area only having gotten better as the years have gone on, we've now gotten to a point where he can legitimately be called one of the best in-ring workers in the world, if not the best. That said, like with everyone else in this video, it's not just his in-ring work which makes Seth as good as he is, as there's also his ability to create a character which captures people's attention. And while not every attempt he's made here has necessarily been successful, for the most part, he's always excelled by knowing exactly what will draw fans' eyes towards him. Sometimes this is done through the messianic presence he presents in some of his various incarnations, sometimes it's through his outlandish dress sense, and sometimes it's through a pure babyface promo. And sometimes, when required, he will just let that in-ring work do the talking with some of the flashiest, crowd-pleasing theatrics out there. Whatever he chooses to do, he'll always make it work. Need a sleazy heel? He's your man. Need a heroic babyface? He's also the guy you're looking for. And if you need someone who can work just as well as a single star as he can as part of a well-oiled stable, then believe in Seth Rollins. In fact, so good is Seth that even if you need him to take a step away from the main event scene for a while and work in the Intercontinental title picture instead, he can do this just as well, just as he can also perform to a high standard in one of WWE's rare mixed tag team situations when he's working alongside his wife Becky Lynch. Really, we struggle to think of anything Seth Rollins can't do, and considering he's still 37 and likely has a long time left with which to get even better in, that's a scary thought. Who knows, by the time he's done, maybe he'll even be considered on the same level of our next subject, someone the Architect has been compared to before, and that's Macho Man Randy Savage. Yes, how could we not talk about Randy Savage when we're talking about the greatest all-rounders to ever do it? Because he in many ways feels like an OG in mastering everything. After all, if you're looking for figures from Golden Era WWF who can stand toe-to-toe with him in all things wrestling, then you might have a hard time. And that's because not only was the Macho Man one of the greatest gimmicks of all time, someone so iconic that you could walk up to any random person in the street, hit them with an "ooh yeah," and have them almost certainly know who you're talking about, he also managed to perfect everything else about being a WWF superstar too. That's right, whether it's his ability to peacock his way down to the ring in some of the flashiest and most flamboyant ring gear ever seen, or his uber charismatic promo skills where he produced some of the greatest mic work of all time, enough to make him the cream of the crop, you might say, there's little doubt that in 80s WWF, there was no one better than him in the ring or out of it. In fact, it was his iconic match against Ricky Steamboat at WrestleMania 3 which first introduced many WWF fans to the idea that, yes, while promos and entrances and segments can be a big part of what makes wrestling entertaining, the actual matches themselves can be just as important, as when done well, they can be as captivating as what he and the Dragon put on that night. And this wasn't a one-time thing for Savage either, as during an era when in-ring work was never less valuable, he was often able to steal the show with great bouts. It didn't matter if his opponent was Ric Flair or Hulk Hogan. Hell, at one point he was even able to get a great match out of the Ultimate Warrior, something which not many wrestlers could do back then. But let's rewind a second because we just mentioned a name who just so happens to be our next subject, as they also serve as one of the greatest all-rounders to ever do it. Who are we talking about this time? Ric Flair. Seriously, even this many years after his peak, you could still make a very solid argument that Ric Flair is the greatest in-ring wrestler to ever do it. And if you need any evidence of why this is the case, you only have to look to the countless absolute classic bouts he's had throughout his career. bouts against the likes of Ricky Steamboat, Terry Funk, Harley Race, Dusty Rhodes, Shawn Michaels, Sting, and of course, Randy Savage. But being arguably the greatest in-ring worker of all time alone isn't enough to earn a spot on today's video. No, for that, you also have to be a master of your craft in every other area too. Luckily then, the Nature Boy is just this, as whenever he's been handed a mic throughout his decades-long career, it's always been appointment viewing. Sometimes it can be serious, such as his spilled liquor promo back in 1980s Jim Crockett Promotions. Sometimes it can be hilarious, such as his woo-off with Jay Lethal in 2010's TNA. Or sometimes it can be just plain iconic, such as his "with a tear in my eye" post-Royal Rumble winner's speech in 1992. And when it comes to creating the perfect gimmick with a great amount of longevity, few others have ever beaten him, as even today, the character of the Nature Boy, a high-rolling playboy who knows he's better than everyone else and isn't afraid to show it, is being aped by wrestlers and other entertainers all over the world. Even the rap world has taken him on as something of a legend in recent years, in fact, as can be seen with things like Offset's 2018 song, Ric Flair Drip. So when we're talking about iconic, there aren't many who have had that crossover appeal in the same way as the 16-time-plus world champion has. But then, what else would you expect from such a great all-rounder? An Olympic gold medal? Well, while Ric Flair may not have this, our next subject most certainly does, the great Kurt Angle. Now, when it comes to Kurt Angle, the case for why he deserves to be considered a great all-rounder should be obvious. After all, he's a great technical wrestler, one of the best to ever do it, easily on the level of a Bryan Danielson or a Ric Flair. And he's also an excellent promo, as his time with both WWE and TNA showed. On top of that, he radiates a star quality that few others can match. But the real thing that seals the deal with him is that he was able to develop all of these skills so quickly. Seriously, perhaps no one in the history of wrestling has ever risen as highly as him as quickly as he did. And we know he was a very accomplished amateur wrestler before that, but that doesn't necessarily mean that you'll be a great pro wrestler too. In Kurt's case, however, he was so quick to level up in all of these aspects that by the time his rookie year was over, he'd already be WWF champion, and no one was batting an eyelid over this. And no one was batting an eyelid either when he went on to become world champion a total of 9 more times over the course of his career in both WWE and TNA. And it wasn't always the same character he portrayed during these various reigns either. No, further proving his incredible levels of versatility, he could mix things up to a seemingly endless degree depending on the situation. That's how we'd sometimes get him being the wrestling machine, while other times we'd get him being the slimy, scared heel, while other times still, we'd get him being the comedy goofball. And when he wasn't doing any of those, he might be presenting as either a pure white meat American babyface, a grizzled veteran, or even an on-screen authority figure. Truly then, it feels like there's nothing Kurt Angle can't do inside of the squared circle, and for that reason, he can't not be considered one of the greatest all-rounders to ever do it. But then, the same thing could be said about everyone else we've discussed today, as they each have a case for being the greatest of all time in that respect.